Welcome to our viewing audience. I'm Seth Cropsey, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute and also director of Hudson Center for American Seapower. I have the pleasure today to introduce Congressman Jared Golden. The congressman represents the 2nd District of Maine in the U.S. Congress, where he serves on the Small Business Committee and the Armed Services Committee Subcommittee for Sea Power and Projection Forces. And that will occupy much of our discussion today. He grew up in Leeds, a small town in Androscoggin County. After enlisting as an infantryman in the Marines, Mr. Golden deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Before returning home to Maine, he holds a BA in History and Politics from Bates College in Lewiston. Congressman Golden currently lives in Lewiston with his wife and daughter. So our discussion today will try to cover a whole lot of stuff. Navy shipbuilding, it's the Navy's industrial base and force structure, both now and in the future. In particular, as these subjects affect great power competition, China and the Indo-Pacific. But it is impossible to ignore the obvious, and all the more so because Congressman Golden served as a Marine in Afghanistan. I suppose that most of you understand, have seen that of the 13 U.S. servicemen who were killed last Thursday at the Kabul airport, 11 were young Marines, 1 a Navy corpsman, as well as a member of the Army Special Forces. So, Congressman, looking at the swift departure from Afghanistan, could you talk about what the consequences for the U.S. and our relations with others, both friends and adversaries, are? What do you see ahead?
I certainly think that there are some negative consequences associated with the way that the withdrawal has ultimately been carried out. Not textbook planning, a short timetable, despite the fact that one could have seen this coming for quite some time now. I think many people were caught flat-footed. And as a result, some of the chaos of the last few weeks is going to be damaging. We've heard discussions about the image of the United States in regards to whether or not we are someone that people want to work with in the future. This was a part of the discussion when we pulled out of Syria too, you'll remember, with a strong focus on our Kurdish allies. So that is one potential negative consequence, no doubt. That being said, I defer a little bit with some people who I think view greater consequences as it pertains to our decision to get out of Afghanistan. I actually supported President Trump's call to get out and the agreement he made last November, one of the few Democrats nationally to step out and be supportive of that. I don't think it was a perfect deal by any means, but I do think it was the right strategic move for the country. Some folks will tell you that this is going to, in some ways, I think, somehow empower China in the region. I actually think the inverse. We've been underwriting security in that region for some time now. China has been wanting to get in there and go after mineral deposits and mining opportunities. Their One Belt, One Road initiative runs through that region, and that insecurity is now, in part going to be their responsibility. So I actually think that some people are going to be proven wrong in some of their predictions about the long-term consequences of getting out of Afghanistan. A final note on this is multiple administrations have said we need to be looking to the rise of China and Russia, great power competition, and get a focus into the Pacific, and that requires a strategic shift out of the Middle East. This is a part of that move, in my opinion.
Do you think that the withdrawal, the large withdrawals that have already taken place, have had a positive benefit for the bottom line, let's say, with the Navy Marine Corps team? I mean, if there's a conflict, or if our policy is to deter conflict, which I hope it is, it's a naval theater from the South China Sea to, all the space enclosed by the first island chain to the Indian Ocean, through the archipelagos that connect Middle East with China, to the Persian Gulf, into the Eastern Med, into the Black Sea. I mean,
Indian Ocean,
your
Pacific
geography.
Ocean, absolutely, yeah.
So, has there been any positive effect on the bottom line, or should we expect one?
In regards to the budget
Right.
needs
Because
of
we
the
pulled
Navy,
out.
yeah.
The 2,500 troops is not going to be a cash cow, but the troops that have already been pulled out were larger in number.
Yeah, so we have spent collectively trillions in my adult life since I joined post 9/11 and deployed first to Afghanistan and then Iraq. A lot of the military expenditures in the Middle East have, in some ways, not been a part of that defense budget, which gets talked about in Washington so much. OCO, the overseas contingency accounts shielding some of that, I think, at least from taxpayers in terms of the true cost. So is there some dividend to be had there in regards to reprioritizing some of that money spent in places like Afghanistan and Iraq? Absolutely. I think that there is. And that being said, I think that it's really important for someone like myself who supported the decision to get out of Afghanistan to make very clear that I still think the counterterrorism mission is essential and one that we have to be prepared to continue to pursue and carry out. I just don't agree with those who think we have to have bases and boots on the ground in a place like Afghanistan in order to be successful in that. I see a real opportunity as the Commandant of the Marine Corps is looking to reprioritize the Marine Corps mission back to its naval roots, getting back onto ships and out to sea. Everyone knows that the Marines had to reconfigure themselves and their focus to be a part of the mission in Afghanistan and in particular in Iraq, serving as more of a land force. And as a result, as I think about the need for us to have a strong presence in the Pacific, this is going to create some space for the Commandant of the Marine Corps to pull that off, I think, and get back to the roots. I served 4 years in the Marine Corps Infantry, where we were training for mountain warfare and urban warfare. Very little time spent on naval ships, on amphibious ships, or doing the traditional sea-to-land operations. Those muscles, I think, have atrophied a bit, and they need to be worked out and redeveloped if the Marine Corps is going to be able to carry out that mission in the Pacific in the future.
And General Berger, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, has made it pretty clear that he sees things as you suggest.
I think it's absolutely critical for the future of the country.
Yeah. So, just one more point on Afghanistan. The 2,500 U.S. servicemen who have now left Afghanistan made relatively little difference budget-wise. I don't see in the shipbuilding budget or training or exercise accounts of the Navy any significant uptick. So no, I mean, a more effective deterrent force requires investment in ships and sailors and training and the whole thing. But although the Trump administration was proud of its additions to the defense budget, if you compare those additions to what the Reagan administration did when it came into office, the Trump uptick is like this, and the Reagan uptick is like this. I mean, it's not an uptick; it's a steep slope, sustained for several years, down a little bit, then up a little bit. So that brings me to the question whether the political consequences of the withdrawal outweigh the budget ones. I mean, I'd like to see, I think it would be useful to see some explanation of how resources that had been used here will be applied there. And I haven't seen that yet. I may have missed it.
Well, it's only been a few days, but certainly that is a debate that we're going to have. In fact, I think we'll be having that debate tomorrow in the House Armed Services Committee markup. Some reporting around some of us who are supportive of increasing the top line budget above and beyond what has been put forward by the Biden administration. And some of that discussion will be about how do we spend those resources. If we are going to put more into it, where should they go? I will be a strong advocate of giving that to our Navy shipbuilding budget accounts, among other things that I think are really important and currently underinvested in. But I hesitate to get into it too much without digging into the past, although I do think a bigger investment, like you pointed out, with the Reagan administration coming on the tail end of a pretty sizable divestment from our military coming out of Vietnam. I don't think administrations, prior to Trump, either Bush, as we ramped up for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, or the Obama administration pushed through, those types of cuts, like what I've learned about. This was all before I was born, and the divestment from our military that took place in the 70s and pre-Reagan administration. So where credit is due to the Trump administration for pushing for a strong national defense budget. Like I said, I think we'll see more of that discussion tomorrow. And see what comes out of the House markup of the NDAA. But I will be making a strong case and be supportive of anyone else who has amendments or other things to offer that would increase our shipbuilding budget. I would, for me, it's not just a discussion about resources in the Middle East. There's political capital being expended there as well. And in general, I think a distraction from a change that's taking place in the world right now. Like I said, we should not lose focus on counterterrorism and threats from groups like ISIS, ISIS-K, or even from Al-Qaeda. But perhaps, with new technologies developed over the last 20 years, we can go after that threat without having large forces on the ground. And that should allow policymakers to set the tone in how we change our focus to the Pacific, to the Baltic states and other important allies to counter those threats that we see are growing.
Mm-hmm. So let's get away from the budget question for just a second. It's even if defense dollars go up, or if there's an agreement between Congress and the administration, something or other, that will help deter a conflict with China. What's the current state of the U.S. defense industrial base, especially the naval part? I couldn't help but notice earlier in the year that the National Defense Industrial Association said that for the second consecutive year, the defense industrial base is in decline. Mm-hmm. The report noted, and I'll quote you, although I suspect you've probably seen this, demand, production inputs, innovation, supply chain, competition, industrial security, political and regulatory demands, and productive capacity and surge readiness are all problematic. Productive capacity and surge readiness alone could spell the difference between deterrence or non-deterrence, between victory and defeat in any protracted conflict. So why are these trends negative? And what's to be done about them? What can Congress do about them?
Yep. This is an important discussion. One thing that comes to mind for me is in World War II, after Pearl Harbor, we had a massive whole-of-nation effort to ramp up our industrial base capabilities and produce the weapons of war necessary to back up our troops who served for the duration of the war, many of them. And it was a whole, like I said, whole-of-nation effort. That's not what we have now, and it's not how we are currently positioning ourselves or how we have fought the wars of my generation, less than 1% of the nation in uniform at any given time. That being said, I think we could get there if we had to, but we need the military today, as you've pointed out, to try and prevent having to go that route. Our military is trying to forestall or outright prevent an outbreak of conflict between us and a great power like China. But at the end of the day, the mission is to have a force that's ready to fight and win. And they can't do everything. We need to be talking about diplomacy as well and other avenues for preventing conflict. As it relates to the supply side industrial base, I'll just stick to what I have learned as a representative of Maine, where shipbuilding is really, I think, the number one military asset that we bring to bear for the nation. Bath Iron Works, one of two shipyards that make large surface combatants for the United States Navy. So we have serious, I think, workforce challenges similar to the rest of the country, both in and outside of the military industrial base. In general, manufacturing workforces are in decline. And that's a serious problem. We have seen in Maine population decline accompanied with a kind of change in how we directed youth to pursue work and studies. So an entire generation encouraged to go to four-year college degrees. We saw a lot of people leaving the state of Maine for those types of opportunities and not necessarily coming back, where at the same time, the best jobs that we have in the state of Maine, you're going to find at a place like Bath Iron Works, in the shipbuilding industry, or in many of our paper mills in Maine. These are very blue-collar, hands-on jobs that historically have not required a four-year degree, but do require hard skill sets that have been allowed, I think, to go away and be lost. And so at a place like Bath Iron Works right now, not only do they have an aging workforce that is retiring or coming up on retirements at a pretty rapid rate, they're hiring by the thousands every year just to try and keep up, and they are slowly growing, but they're having to start from scratch with a lot of these young workers and teach them the very basics of shipbuilding, whether that be welding or whatever it may be. It is a different workforce challenge than what they've had in generations past. So that's definitely something that I've put a real focus on, is how do we get programs stood up in the state of Maine at our community colleges, or even apprenticeship programs or pre-apprenticeship programs that are going to help people get a foot in the door of eventually getting a job, a great job opportunity at a place like Bath Iron Works. But it's going to take a while to build that back up. It takes, on average, what we have found from talking with the shipyards, 7 years to get a fully competent, specialized shipbuilder at a place like Bath Iron Works. That's a big investment you got to make.
We've been hearing whole of government as it's become almost a buzzword over the past, 10 years? At least 10 years. When he was vice president, Mike Pence gave a speech at Hudson here talking about the importance of whole of government. Do you see any movement towards it, or are we just sort of saying the right things but not doing them?
Well, you hear a lot of people talk about a whole of government approach and the ways in which how we're structured economically and as a society in our democracy, sometimes at a disadvantage to, let's say, an adversary like China, where they truly have a very hands-on whole of government approach. I don't think we're looking for that here in the United States. So we have to figure out how to take the way we do things, our capitalist society, our democracy, and get the very best out of it. I think that we can be and be very competitive, but there's a fine line out there somewhere. I mean, there's just talking about shipbuilding skills right now, debate about whether or not private shipyards like Bath Iron Works should be investing in the creation of training programs for future shipbuilders, or should the state bear some of the responsibility through their taxpayer dollars that flow to the University of Maine or the community college system, or should the Navy and the federal government kick in since they are the end user? Someone could suggest that maybe everyone should put a little bit in, and would that be an all-of-government approach, a federal, state, and private sector partnership? Sure. I don't want to put all of the burden on taxpayers alone, though. Where we have a private shipyard like Bath, they certainly have to chip in a little bit as well.
But do you see that happening? I mean,
sure. I mean,
realistically, do you see that happening?
With the right focus and the right leaders in place. So I'm currently on the Armed Services Committee. I'm constantly talking to the workers at the shipyard, to the management team at the shipyard, and to the Navy. As a result, I have set aside $1 million earmark community-directed funding, call it whatever you want, specifically for the purpose of training shipbuilders in welding. These are basic skills for people that don't have any experience. That's going to help set up a mobile training unit through the Maine Community College system to go out and travel around this very big state, the state of Maine, and try and attract our youth at the high school level or just out of high school into the industry, and hopefully funnel them in to an apprenticeship program or a 2-year degree that will result in their getting a skill set and then a job at the shipyard. So there's plenty of evidence of it, but I think you need leaders in place who are going to know what their priorities should be and then stay focused on them. Okay, so I got one, potential program standing up there. That's not enough. This is the type of thing that I think I could spend a career in Congress focusing on in order to get that shipyard, the workers, and those workers the skills and the equipment that they need to be successful.
But again, to take the contrarian view to yours, that makes the most sense if the shipbuilders can count on a steady budget from year to year. But if the shipbuilders don't know that they're going to have resources, are they going to make investments in ships? Are they going to make investments in training and bringing in new workers and giving them the skills that they need?
No, definitely not a contrarian view. I couldn't agree with you more about that. In fact, in this year's National Defense Authorization Act in the House side, I've successfully got language in there to authorize the Navy to do a 15-ship, 5-year, multi-year procurement of the Arleigh Burke DDG-51 Flight 3. There's been a lot of concern in the industrial base about that, as the Navy has been talking about moving to the DDGX, future large surface combatant program. Both shipyards were sounding the alarm that if there was not a steady, commitment to the budget for the large surface combatant, that they were worried they were going to have to lay off thousands of shipbuilders, and that they would not be able to just turn that spigot back on and get that skilled workforce to work on a future large surface combatant in 2028 or 2030 or whenever that program may finally, put down its first hull. So I'm with you on the need for that steady investment, and I think most of the members of the Armed Services Committee are too. At the end of the day, I was disappointed with the request on the shipbuilding side from this administration. And I think that we're going to be speaking to that priority as a committee with the bill that you'll see coming out of committee tomorrow in the House, same as the Senate. it should be in top priority today and should remain so for years to come, as far as I'm concerned. As long as I'm in Congress, I'm not leaving the Armed Services Committee, and I'm certainly not going to shift it off of the Seapower subcommittee.
I could quote from a lot of reports that show issues, problems with the Navy's defense industrial base, but I think you know all of them. And I'll put it as simply as possible to our audience. They're big problems. Okay, so how do you assess the current state of U.S. shipbuilding and industrial base? And yeah, let me leave it at that. I mean, are you in a position to be able to see the broad picture here? Be interesting to people watching to hear what your assessment.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about the need for a consistent shipbuilding budget and that it needs to grow. Just revisiting the last question a little bit. It's not just a Biden administration problem. The Trump administration talked a big game about a 355 ship Navy. I did not see budget requests that matched what they were talking about.
No.
No one has, I think, shown a true commitment since I have been a member of Congress, or really in my lifetime, to growing the Navy to the size that I believe it needs to be. I'm not fixated on a number, whether that be 305 or 355 or 435 or whatever it may be. It needs to be big enough to carry out the mission that it is assigned by policymakers and by our country's leaders. And I think there's plenty of evidence right now that it's not big enough. So we either need to change the mission assignments that is being asked to carry out, or we need to make that serious investment and grow the Navy shipbuilding budget. It's the only way that we're going to get the Navy that I think we need looking into the future to meet the country's interests. In regards to the condition of our industrial base, some people can say it's declining. Again, I'm only going to speak to what I've experienced and what I focused on since I became a member of Congress, and that's shipbuilding in the large surface combatant lane. So Bath Iron Works, incredibly skilled workforce. People always talk about Bath built, best built. The Navy still stands by that. It is a high quality ship. In fact, it is the most lethal, most competitive, deadly, whatever words you want to use. It's the most successful destroyer ship in the history of the world right now. No one can compete with it whatsoever. It's often called the Cadillac of the Navy, the backbone of the Navy. Call it what you will. It is an incredible war-fighting machine, and we have a workforce at Bath Iron Works that has fine-tune those skills almost to perfection. They are capable of punching these ships out, I think, at a greater rate, as long as we're able to keep that steady budget and continue, I hope, to grow it. But you need a long-term commitment from the Navy, too. It's not just budget from Congress. It's a Navy that can make a 30-year shipbuilding plan at least and then stick to it. What I often see right now is a lot of kind of up and down and hesitancy in decision making. When I first got into Congress, as an example, the Navy was saying the destroyer is going to be the backbone of the growth of the Navy's fleet. They were going to reinvest in the modernization of existing destroyers and continue to procure them at a higher rate.
Yep.
Within 2 years' time, they changed their tune. Suddenly talking about letting go of those ships, allowing them to decommission over time, cutting their anticipated procurement of large surface combatants in the future, and talking about this large distributed fleet with a heavy focus on unmanned that many of us believe will be important to the future of our fleet structure, but it's largely at this time unproven. And therefore, we're not ready to follow them on that investment. So to me, yeah, we're very capable when we have focus, when we have the budgets provided from Congress that are necessary, and a Navy that can develop a long-term vision and stick to it. Of course, Congress has to hold their feet to the fire on that.
Good luck.
Yeah.
The Navy has spoken in general, but not in specifics, in what you described, this wave pattern
Sure.
of the future. And of course, you're right that this is a moving target, a dodging target. Navy's also, as you pointed out, talked about increasing the fraction of unmanned vehicles and smaller vessels that are supposedly less expensive but more numerous and more lethal. Let's say that some coherent plan emerges from these ideas or some combination of them. Do you think that this addresses great power competition as it grows, especially between the U.S. and China? And what kind of force structure is needed in the foreseeable future to deter, or if need be, defeat, and retain our current position as the major Pacific power?
One problem that I see now through, now in my second term on the Armed Services Committee is, in order to answer a question about what type of Navy do we need and how big should it be, and what should the composition of its fleet be, I think that the Navy does need more out of Congress and out of our nation's leaders, whether that be the White House or high-up leaders in the Pentagon in regards to what is our vision for the world and for America in that world well into the 21st century. So how can the Navy be expected to know the size of the fleet that it needs and the correct composition of that fleet if there's no clarity about what the mission is? Let's say vis-a-vis how we will interact with China in the Pacific. When you ask me about a whole-of-government approach, I do think what we need is a whole-of-government strategy for how we will interact with, for good or bad, a country, a rising power like China in the Pacific in the next 10 years, 30 years, or even 50 years. There was a great piece I read recently, I can't remember who wrote it, that talked about a essentially 50-year strategy deployed by China over the last half century to go from a almost non-existent naval maritime power to now a global one that is pushing us, and some people would argue even possibly surpassing us in regards to global maritime power and influence. That might be particularly true if you're looking beyond just a Navy, but rather at merchant marines, port infrastructure around the world, and other investments that they've been making, not just in the Pacific, but even in South America, in the Western Hemisphere, off the coast of Africa, gaining, I think, a lot of access in places that they didn't have just a decade ago. That's a whole-of-government strategy that they've been pursuing with discipline. So that's what I think we need in regards to a whole-of-government approach. We got to know what we want, and then we should talk to the Navy about what they need to get that done. Often I think the focus of discussion in Congress is backwards. We spend a lot of time talking about the ships, about the weapons, the armaments, the things that are going to be made.
It mirrors the Navy's.
Yes.
The Navy is focused on budget, and it's focused on force structure, but there's no guiding idea. What do you do? Force structure for what?
Yes, a force structure for what is the key word. I personally don't see a future where we don't need ships like destroyers. I don't think you're ever going to replace those with unmanned capabilities. Here's one way I've looked at it in the last budget debate in NDAA, particularly with the Biden administration proposing the procurement of just one DDG. It was slated for a minimum of 2 in the Navy's own budget projections. That was the number they were putting out for the next 5 years, 2, 2, 2, 2. I don't think that's enough, but To then get one was just a total shock. But in talking with Navy surface combatant commanders, one, they are very clear about the need for the Flight 3 and the new capabilities, particularly the radar capabilities it's going to bring to the fleet. And it's just now getting out to sea, the first couple of those ships. But in addition, we look at China making massive investments in their own destroyers, in their own frigates. They certainly wouldn't be making those investments if they thought that they were not going to be competitive and a part of the fleet that they think that they need. They seem confident that we're not going to render them obsolete with the offensive capabilities that we have. So I question those who say that our large surface combatants or our aircraft carriers or some of our bigger platforms are somehow becoming obsolete or likely to be obsolete in the future. I think they have a vision for what warfare might look like that isn't based in reality.
What can Congress do? I mean, to encourage Navy to think about the larger question, the strategic question first, or at least with equal emphasis to the subordinate, what I believe is the subordinate question, which is fleet architecture. I mean, what means are there that where Congress can encourage?
I think Congress needs to have that put that responsibility on its own plate. For starters, we need to have that discussion and that debate. Most of our time is spent arguing again over platforms, and district equities, and lobbying pressures, whatever it may be. When someone like the Commandant of the Marine Corps starts talking about making a massive force redesign that is focused on going in the strategic direction that he believes necessary based upon what I believe he's being tasked with from the Pentagon, and they, I imagine, in coordination with the executive branch under the Trump administration, probably even Obama administration before that, and I imagine Biden today, he faced a lot of pushback from people who didn't want to see divestment in tanks or divestment in F-35 numbers in a squadron or whatever it may be, a big fight. I think Congress needs to spend more time working with the President of the United States, whoever that may be, developing that vision for the future of our country, clearly communicating what is in our strategic national interests. What are the clear red lines that are out there? What absolutely needs to be done? Just as a basic example, keeping sea lanes open, ensuring access around the world. Then pass that down to our Navy combatant commanders and let them talk about the fleet architecture that they need. And let the chips fall where they may in regards to how that may impact individuals politically.
I don't think you'd be surprised that you're not the only person who thinks this.
It takes years of discipline and commitment to get to it and to change something like that, right? I mean, that is my my perception of the problem, though.
Yeah. The Navy has a plan called Divest to Invest. Mm-hmm. Just for our audience, the idea is to, and you mentioned it earlier, is to get rid of surface ships, a large number of surface ships, and replace them with newer designs, with different kinds of ships, perhaps smaller, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, well, I won't pass a judgment on that, but the departing Indo-Pacific commander, Admiral Davidson, Phil Davidson, said to Congress in March, an invasion of Taiwan is possible in the next 6 years. And his successor, John Aquilino, Admiral Aquilino, said the same thing. I mean, more or less the same thing. And perhaps equally unfortunately, the Navy's track record in putting new ships to sea is not stellar. And, you know, one example is what's ongoing right now, which is the Constellation-class frigate, which was supposed to be built by Fincantieri. And what I hear is the Navy is very happy with the ship, especially the roominess of the bridge and the berthing area. So the implication is, what I infer from that is that everything else has to be changed around. That's not going to put 4 Constellations in the water in 4 or 5 years, as was originally expected.
Yep.
But that's the same interval that these 2 admirals, you know, who should know what they're talking about, have warned that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is, you know, something to take seriously.
Yeah, a lot of ground we can cover there. I mean, divest to invest is, I think, a good thing when done correctly, and with a clear understanding of why. What are you giving up, and why can you give it up today without creating some kind of weakness that your adversaries could exploit in the immediate? And what are you then seeking to invest in? I'll stick with the Marines. I'm partial, being a Marine myself, trying to get away from being a land-based, almost secondary army, as it has been in the Middle East over the last 2 decades. An acknowledgement that we don't necessarily need tanks, that we're going to divest there, and we're going to invest in some new offensive capabilities that are going to help get us onto those that naval route, that history mission that the Marine Corps is known for. So the ability, at the unit level to reach out and touch the enemy from a ship or from an island, forward deployed or whatever it may be. That's a divest to stress strategy that can be implemented now and get that new capability deployed within a matter of years. Not divesting to invest, on unproven capabilities and technologies that could be a decade or more from being fully developed. I think that approach is dangerous. What the Marines are doing, much more, I think, tactical. And they're investing in a capability that they seek to deliver imminently. In some cases, putting it out in the field already. As you were talking about Taiwan, they're certainly thinking about that. Unmanned, very important. Some of these future technologies have potential. I don't envision a future where there is such a thing as conflict that is bloodless, and nor do I think we should aspire to that anyways. But at the end of the day, I think we need a Navy with destroyers and other capabilities, just as we need a Marine Corps that is deadly and lethal, that's willing and able and ready and equipped to go downrange and punch someone in the face and draw blood. So that's just the approach that I take, the mindset that I own as a member of the Armed Services Committee, and how I think about this discussion about how we prepare for the future, particularly the divest to invest strategy. One thing that I will be really critical of just in this current budget is we're going to divest from cruisers. So cruise missile capabilities, important air defense mission for the entire fleet, and at the same time, you're going to cut back on the procurement of DDG-51 Flight 3s that were set to take on that air missile defense command role.
Integrated. Right.
Integrated.
Yeah.
You're divesting in both at the same time. That leaves an immediate gap that creates a weakness in the fleet that is, I think, completely unacceptable. So not a smart move there. And I think the last thing I would just say about this is that discipline to stick with the plan that you have developed, that 30-year shipbuilding plan that we're talking about. What are the costs of not doing that? You have been talking about the frigate. Before that, it was the LCS, almost a complete failure to launch in some ways there. And speaking of that, the Zumwalt, which has been built at Bath Iron Works. All 3 ships, the last of them will soon be rolling out and delivered to the Navy, and yet somehow the Navy failed to develop a weapon system that we could even afford to field on that ship. And as a result, massive investment, almost completely wasted. Completely disrupted that shipyard and its flow and its workforce. Had to go from doing something that they were very skilled and specialized at in making the Arleigh Burke DDG-51 and shift to making something completely new, only to have the Navy and Congress pull the rug out from underneath them and say, well, we want you to go back to building the Arleigh Burke. Perhaps they never should have made that move to begin with until we knew for sure that we had a developed, well-designed future ship that the Navy would be able to stick with. And by the way, arm with a viable weapon system. And still, we're now starting to hear about a shift towards a DDGX, wanting to put hypersonics on destroyers, maybe directed energy, laser technology, all of these things. I don't think we're there yet, but what we do have is a Flight 3 that is without question the most powerful destroyer ever fielded in the history of the world. It's a very competitive, very capable ship, and we're good at making it. So let's keep investing in that until we are 100% sure that we're ready to make the transition to a new large surface combatant. That's the approach that I think the Navy should take. And it's an approach proven by the huge success that is the Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Started in the 1980s, incremental improvements and developments to where it is today with the Flight 3.
Do you think that the Navy's proposal to build smaller combatants that are more numerous and at least equally lethal or close to equally lethal has merit?
I think that you should certainly test it, look into it, but I don't think that we can shift away from what we have, what we know has worked for the Navy for years, and just suddenly make this rapid change, largely dependent upon developing technologies that haven't been battle tested, haven't been fielded and put out and operated with. I think you got to take that slow and with caution. The phrase I use, having learned it in the Marines, is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So it seems like a pretty big sea change that they have suddenly come up with their distributed maritime fleet proposals, and I want to see proof.
Mm-hmm. What the current CNO, Admiral Day, has served, I think it's 2 years this summer. So under normal circumstances, his term would be up 2 years from now. What kinds of qualities do you look for in a new CNO?
It's the things we've been talking about. I think the ability to help formulate a 30-year plan and then get everyone on board and stick with it. To come to Congress and make the case as strongly as possible. With a long game, I think, vision, constantly reiterating to Congress, this is what the Navy needs based upon the criteria that has been given to us from you all as policymakers. You define the mission to us, and we're going to tell you what we need. Based upon what we know right now, this is the fleet that we need, and then stick with it and sell it. So far, what I've seen is about 3 different versions of a proposed Navy architecture, and I've been in Congress for less than 4 years.
Well, and those versions are like slinkies. I mean, it's a range between X number of ships and Y number of ships. So, what do you do with that? I mean, you
I'll-
buy it?
We're going to keep revisiting the Marine Corps. The Marines will be, I guess, happy to know that I am a believer and a supporter in what they're trying to do. They have a specific mission in mind somewhere in the world that they believe it's necessary for the Marine Corps to own it in order for the national security interests of America to be met.
Yeah.
And they are designing a force that is equipped with what's necessary to get it done. And they're not asking us to delay on that capability. They want to deliver it to us almost immediately. That's what I want to see out of the Navy. It's what I want to see out of the Army. Is a clear, well thought out strategy where it is going to be needed most in the world in the next 20 years with a solid plan that you're willing to bring to Congress and stick to passionately and defend. And I think that's what we need out of a CNO.
Are you a member of the Taiwan Caucus?
I'm not.
There's a big one. But nevertheless, what's your sense of the political climate insofar as honoring the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979? Are we there, or is this talk, or what is it? I mean,
that needs to be a national conversation. What do we believe is in our best interest as a country, and what are we prepared to do as a country? Because honoring that commitment may very well mean a rising potential for conflict, depending upon what China intends to do. I think you've referenced two individuals, leaders in the region who have a stated belief that China will invade Taiwan. That history certainly hasn't been written. We don't know that for sure, and how we approach our relations with them and with Taiwan diplomatically, militarily, with our partners in the region may very well determine whether or not that ever happens. But if it does, the country has to be behind whatever decision we make in Congress or the commander-in-chief. That is a big potential threat. I think some people would say the most likely scenario that could lead to a great conflict between us and China in the future is right there in the Taiwan Strait.
what sense do you have of your constituents on this subject?
My sense is that many of them are not aware of the potential threat that resides there. I think that they would approach any call to war, to protracted war, with I think skepticism is the word that I would use. But if leaders believe that it is in the best interest of the country, and the American people agree with them with that, then I think that we're more than capable of working together, coming together as a country to meet the objective, whatever it may be. But I think that we owe it as policymakers to have that conversation with the entire nation. I don't think that the American people ought to be surprised by some kind of catastrophe in the Straits of Taiwan, that they are not clear about what is the objective, what is our own personal national security interest as a country, and why should we send young men and women there to potentially give their lives in service of that mission. So Afghanistan is kind of a good example of what I'm talking about. I've been saying for a while now that I believed it was in our best interest to withdraw. That being said, I have clearly communicated, going back till November, when I first came out in support of then President Trump's decision, that I believe that this would result in the ultimate failure of the Afghan government. And I thought that our constituents, the American people, deserve to hear that from policymakers. Perhaps a flaw, I think, in the Trump administration approach was not putting all of the cards on the table and saying, look, we went there after 9/11 with a counterterrorism mission. We got OBL. We got most of al-Qaeda's top operatives. We either took them out or they spent years in Gitmo. Some of them are still in Gitmo. We've developed new counterterrorism capabilities, and I think we should stay focused on that. I don't see an ongoing interest or that our interests are well met by remaining in Afghanistan. But I did think it was important to clearly articulate to my constituents, I believe that the Afghan government will fail. It is not, after 20 years, capable of defeating the Taliban. It is not capable of running a democracy, largely just rife with corruption and all kinds of other problems, unable to stop the drug trade. I could list the many things that were wrong in Afghanistan. But yet, here in this moment, I think because multiple presidents did not talk openly and honestly about this, because our generals were not clear about what was going on the ground, the American people are largely surprised with the outcome.
One last question, and then we'll let you go. There have been, over the past few days, several not entirely favorable criticisms of the Afghan National Army. What was your experience in working with your Afghan counterparts?
The Afghan National Army was practically non-existent when I was deployed to Afghanistan in 2004. I served the first half of my deployment up on the Pakistan border in Kunar province. A pure counterterrorism mission, a platoon of Marines with Army SF units. We were purely there in the pursuit of Osama bin Laden and other terrorists responsible for 9/11 or that were potential threats to the homeland. That's why we were there. We did shift down to Gardez later in the deployment to help secure a population center important to that first presidential election. So securing the region such that they could actually have a credible turnout in election. Those were the first months that the Afghan National Army actually started to operate and was stood up. So I really didn't serve alongside them, and as a result, can't really speak much to that force or its development over the last decade at least. We were serving alongside tribal militias operating under the direction of Army Special Force units.
Mm-hmm. Who did the language? Who provided language translation?
I think
the Army Special Forces?
Army Special Forces had interpreters who were with them at that time. But look, I think you have to look at what has occurred over the course of the last month. It's hard to deny that the Afghan National Army was not up to the task and not prepared to, as the President said, continue that fight on behalf of their own government. President Biden and President Trump calling into question whether or not our own young men and women should continue to fight and die there if they were no longer willing to carry that fight for themselves. That being said, I think some people have been unfair, and a little bit unforgiving in their criticisms of Afghan soldiers who have been dying by the thousands over the last 5 to 10 years.
We're just about at the end of our allotted time. We've covered a fair amount of ground, but if there's something that we didn't cover that you'd like to discuss, this is the moment to do it. Otherwise, we'll thank our audience and hope to see you again here soon.
No, other than I'd extend an invitation for you to come to Maine. You said that you have good family reasons to come up there to the Lewiston region, but you could come by the shipyard too. If you haven't seen it before, I think you'd be impressed to see what that workforce does.
I've been there. It's very impressive.
It really is.
I know what you're talking about.
Yep.
But it would be good. It's been years, so it would be good to do it again. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for your fine answers to these questions and your observations about them. And I would like to stress the particular importance of identifying a plan, a strategy, something or other that will inform fleet architecture, that will provide the shipbuilding industrial base with the kind of stability it needs to do what we need to do today. I think your comments are very helpful on that, and good luck with the markup tomorrow.
Well, thank you. It'll probably be a good 20-hour markup at a minimum, so I look forward to it.